Hello, folks. Well, today we're going back to an old standby of mine, which is, of course, the product of the Russian Doom community. And this is one that I have passed over for a long time, in spite of it being very tangentially related to a lot of other stuff that I really like. I think it's called 5 Till Level 1 Complex, and it's by Lainos, who I haven't talked about yet, but has been a big fixture of the Russian Doom community. So this map was actually originally supposed to be for Sacrament by Clan BOS, the prequel to A.L.T, but Lainos said that it took a really long time to make his first map in Sacrament, which is called Doxylamine Moon, which is the one that's mostly just about wandering around in this big city. So he didn't have really enough time to work on this. So BeeWen ended up making the map called Controlled System, which I did in a previous episode, and that map is wonderful. One of the best maps from the Russian Doom community, I have to say. I do prefer it even to this one. However, this map came out a year later as an individual map by Lainos, and it is gigantic. This video, as you might have noticed, is like very long. Yeah. So and I even cut out bits of it, to be honest, of me wandering around, because for whatever reason, in spite of the fact that this came out around the same time as A.L.T, and it has a similar mood to Sacrament, two things that I really, really like, I just had never really played through it. This is actually the one kind of product of the community at the time that ended up winning a Cacoward. I think because perhaps Cacoward being, the yearly award for the Doom community. I think perhaps because it's a little bit easier to understand what's going on with this map. It's a giant map where you explore and kill monsters, and it has a similar setup to a lot of his other maps, but it is more combat heavy than, Doxylamine Moon. So yeah, he also released a version of Doxylamine Moon. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, whatever. That called Overdose, that has more monsters and stuff in it as an individual map. But yeah, so this was originally supposed to be the last map of Sacrament. You saw your character sort of woke up in what can only be described as like a bed, just kind of out in this decrepit looking city that's perpetually at night. It has the blood moon texture skybox that Sacrament does. Yeah, that's where you start, right there. And it's a similar thing to Doxylamine Moon, as you start off in this some kind of a facsimile of a bedroom in the Doom engine. But this quickly goes beyond that. And this is a giant map where you just wander around. There's an initial few sections and then a main section. And then eventually it loops back around and comes back, and you sort of exit towards where you began, which is this area. Right here, there's what is basically a hedge maze. I mean, it's not a hedge texture, but you get the idea. So the big feature of this map, I would say, as someone who hadn't actually played through it before, I mean, I was very familiar with this map's existence, but I hadn't, really played through it before, is that, ammo deprivation is major. So I am, really scrapping and scrounging, honestly, throughout the map, which I do kind of admire, although it's a little difficult at the beginning. I mean, in most areas, maybe not this maze area, but in most areas in the map, you can just run around monsters. But that assumes that you know where you're going. So a huge part of this map is just exploring, and that's why I, took more time to kill most of the monsters. But that means that I'm constantly scrapping and scrounging for ammo and health, because especially on Ultraviolence, this map is pretty stingy about that, because it's not really like a combat-y map or even like a slaughter map, and I think it's consistent with the design of the map to have it be more stringent, because it is kind of like it kind of goes with this this theme of like survival, kind of goes with the larger like ethos of a lot of these Russian maps, and like the kind of otherworldliness that you're kind of trying to explore here. And I think I've talked about this so many different times. I'm sure there'll be plenty to ramble on as we go forward. But one thing I will say is that part of the reason that Russian maps tend to be a huge standby for me is just that there's just something about them. There's something, especially around this period of time, you know, like the late aughts and early 2010s. I don't know, from about like 2009 to 2013, 2014, that just it's just a tremendously like artistically rich period for this particular community, which is very much because it's mostly Russian speaking. They have their own community hub called iddqd.ru. And, you know, it's Russian language. I've looked through there on, like, you know, trying to, like, Google Translate and stuff sometimes. But, you know, it's a pretty separate community. In recent years, though, I mean, most of the people who are in that community have, like, registered, do have accounts on Doom World. And when I wrote my piece on A.L.T, that's how I got in contact with them. So I got in contact with Lainos, who made this map, who was an organizer on A.L.T, but didn't actually make any maps. I guess he was kind of like more of someone overseeing the direction of the project. Perhaps he was supposed to make a map and then just had other stuff going on. But then I also talked to BeeWen, who contributed a few maps to A.L.T, and also made this big set called Voyager, which I've shown maps from, and also had that map controlled system in Sacrament, which is, you know, the WAD before A.L.T. So, but I still have the text of the interview from when I talked to Lainos, because Lainos actually did the good thing and had somebody who spoke English translate his answers, so I got much more of a full picture about just like what the Russian Doom community is, and, you know, what his ethos and maybe some of the ethos of the other people designing were through this interview, which was really nice, because that's the one thing is like with something like this, I mean, these people are theoretically around, but it's like, even with like obscure indie games, I can usually find the author on Twitter and like message them or something. But with these like products of communities that are, you know, speak a different language and kind of have different cultural reference points, it's more difficult. So I just felt very nice to be able to do that, even though, you know, I would have liked to talk to Azamail, because he's my favorite designer among them, and as far as I know, Azamail hasn't like really participated in the community. This area I'm in, by the way, right now, fighting this Mancubus, I will come back here much later. So this is one, you know, where you have like a little preview of that that area that I can't get to. It connects up to the gigantic fucking base area that I'll get to about, I would say, 30 minutes into this playthrough. So yeah, as you probably noticed, this is a very, very long playthrough. Right now I'm kind of scrap and scrounge around, get some monsters to kill each other, and have to deal with fucking pain elementals. It's a little touch and go, but this isn't like a super hard map combat wise, but I don't think I was quite ready for it, so I die a little bit more than I would like. Just because that takes up more time in the video, you know. But I ended up cutting some bits out. I'll mention when I cut stuff out later, when I'm just wandering around not sure where I'm going. Because one thing I will say about this is this was the first time I really properly played through this, and I totally got lost at one point. And the solution to it was pretty I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's just there's so much to this map that it was just so hard to tell where to go. But he does the smart thing here by like, you know, so you had the ruined city at the beginning, which was kind of like an introduction. I would say this kind of has several phases. And here there's kind of like a field area, you know, where you're kind of scrapping and trying to take out these monsters. You, of course, had that hedge maze too. And then eventually I will come upon a door, which I passed by earlier, but it's kind of hidden in a corner, which is a very Russian Doom community thing to do, to have the critical path be some kind of slightly obscure location. And it's just like a small door that you could easily miss. It through another like philosophy of design, you could say that that's kind of bullshit. I mean, there's nothing overtly sneaky or like, you know, really kind of unfair about this map's design. Really, it's pretty straightforwardly Doom, but there are some features of like a lot of these Russian WADs that tend to make them be a little bit more obscure, and the environment is a little bit more like a mystery. It's a little bit more like a something that you're kind of trying to uncover and like figure out the logic of, and figure out like the kind of like mood and feeling of, the poetic feeling of. I think it's honestly appropriate to talk about that stuff because it seems very crucial to, I mean, it seems like an intentional part of the construction of these maps. But before I get there, so right now I'm still trying to find a particular key. I'm also probably looking for ammo. Right now, what I'm going to have to do is I will wander around for a bit, but then I will, yeah, finally I picked up the super shotgun there. Easy to miss, but would have helped me save some time. But yeah, eventually I will come upon kind of an obscure door and take an elevator up, and there'll be another ruined city area that's bigger, a little bit more like a sandbox, and has that classic Russian Doom WAD thing of like falling down from above and like trying to navigate platforms within like the limited kind of gravity of Doom. I guess some like the Industrial Zone is an example of a Doom 2 map that does that, map 15. But yeah, like it's so there's it definitely gave me some good feelings because it just reminded me of that, I guess. And then, you know, eventually I'll pick up the red key and then double back to where you saw, and that opens up the giant base area, which is where you spend most of the map, and things just really open up there. It really is kind of like a sandbox. And from what I understand, you can exit the map a lot earlier than I thought. I don't know what switches and where you need to actually hit to have the critical path where you pick up the last two keys open up. I don't know for a fact. I'm not sure, because I've seen things that indicate that you don't necessarily need to do a lot, but I was operating with the assumption that, you know, I needed to explore all the areas, that there were some switches that I was going to hit that were going to put me on a critical path. And perhaps I do need to hit some of those switches, but I'm not sure. I suppose I could investigate that, but I kind of like the mystery being maintained, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I really think the point of a map like this is to explore and experience as much of it as you want to, so I don't feel too bad that I spent longer wandering around. Okay, so yeah, here's the door that you could very easily miss. There's a tree right there. It looks like, you know, sometimes there are textures that like look like doors but are not doors, but that is obviously a crucial critical path door. Having those in obscure places is definitely a thing, especially in Azimale's map. What is it called? It's called like Wood Prison in Sacrament. It has a lot of that, where there are a lot of things that look like doors that are not doors, and then the actual doors are some obscure place. It's kind of trying to trick you. I totally got owned by those Hell Knights that were just like sniping me straight when I opened up. Okay, so yeah, here I'm in this big walkway above, and to the left of where I'm right now is the previous area that I was in that I can drop down, and then to the right of where I am right now is the city. Yeah, you see this city here, and so this is the next like kind of hub point of the game, or sorry, of the level. I think the way it's structured is actually kind of nice because it builds you up into bigger and bigger areas before unleashing you into the giant one. Because I think if the map started out with you being in the giant area, base area that I'll go to later, it would definitely lose a lot of the kind of feeling of it. But I want to read. So this is the one Russian Doom map around the time that when it came out in 2012 that got a Caco award, and Lainos has gotten multiple Caco awards. He's probably one of the most recognized in, I guess, the mainstream consensus Doom community of the Russian mappers, outside of someone like Eternal, who is not really part of this. I'll talk about Eternal at some point. He's another big Russian mapper. But his map that is probably the most well-regarded now is called Comatose, and that came out in 2016. And as far as I know, that's been his last map ever since then. I mean, he might come back to it. In the interview that I did with him, which was in 2017, he said that he wasn't done Doom mapping, so perhaps he'll come back. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's just because a lot of the other Russian mappers, like maybe there's just like something that is obviously what this map is very obvious in some way. It has very dreamy music, it has very dreamy visuals, and the combat and the kind of navigation isn't so difficult or so obscure or so out of left field as to totally just bewilder people. I mean, that is why I liked Azamale's maps, is that he's he's all over the place, completely out of left field sometimes, and does all kinds of crazy things. And I tend to prefer that. I tend to prefer just being surprised, and I kind of knew what this map was going to be like. So I think that's partially why I avoided it, but I'm really glad that I came back to it with almost 9 years of hindsight. 2012 is when I kind of came back into following the Doom community, so I just happened to, hit right at this moment. But yeah, let's read the CAC Award description that it got back at the end of 2012 when the CAC Awards were announced. These were the 9th annual CAC Awards. Okay. Lainos had God damn it. Lainos had a busy year in 2012, managing Clan BOS's A.L.T, which did not win one, as I've mentioned many times before. In addition to publishing 2 single but massive levels, we considered both Object 34 Sonar, which is his other release from this year, and, again, I'm calling it 5-till Level 1 Complex, but who knows. But in the end, found 5-till's impressive visuals and easy-going exploratory gameplay to be the more compelling release. 5-till is gorgeous, haunting, and vast, taking place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where only the unholy remain. You'll travel through a lush mountain wilderness containing a decimated valley village. This is where we are right now. But most of the fun stuff happens in a survival shelter. That's where we're headed. A futuristic compound that's meticulously laid out and full of monsters to fight. Once you get inside the front gate, you're free to explore the bowels of the city. You're also free to ignore most of it entirely, as you'll find out. Well, I didn't find that out, but apparently you can... I'm taking from that you can exit a lot earlier than I think that you can. Action-packed megawads come out every year for players and demo runners to whet their appetite. Maps like 5-till are understandably less common, and when you make them this well, they deserve some notice. Sometimes you just want to enjoy an adventure in Doom with a more free-form environment. That it builds upon the author's previous attempts in the genre is all the more welcome. The only real quibble will be the source port performance, which I don't have problems with because I have a nicer computer and, things have gotten better since 2012. But in a lot of, giant open maps often have trouble in source ports like ZDoom on lower level computers. That had been a problem for years, that people couldn't run stuff because the frame rate would be so low because, it's just like Doom engine wasn't meant to be run at this level, and so it takes a lot more processing power because GZDoom is kind of a separate thing almost from, and a lot of source ports that from the default Doom engine and how it renders stuff, out of necessity. Obviously, you can't make something like this in default Doom. But as 5til's generous placement of flora sprites makes the wildlands unplayable by many, there are a lot of tree sprites. Regardless, 5til level 1 complex is a map to be treasured. I think this hints at something that I've been actually thinking about a lot, but I want to talk about in a little bit later because there's plenty of time. So here I'm trying to just figure out where I need to go. I'm trying to take it slow just so I explore all that I want to explore. And also, because I'm playing on ultraviolence and I'm playing the map for the first time, I really want to make sure that I've gotten all the ammo and stuff that I can get. So I'm trying to figure that out right now. By the way, this music, a thing that I've noticed a lot in the Russian Doom mods is they love to take music from anime. And this is no exception. This one was actually credited, so good for Lainos, because the music in A.L.T and Sacrament, as far as I know, are not credited. But this is the intermission music from the anime series Angel Beats. This is very similar, though, to Controlled System in terms of the music track being kind of dreamy and more ambient and kind of slow. I'm trying to fall on that building. Obviously, I failed at that. I don't think that there's only 2 secrets in this map, apparently. I got one of them, but... and there's a review that I did not look at. The description that I read was by Kamexi, who runs the one-man Doom blog, and he also did a review. He mentions also that 5til level 1 complex may well be Lainos' greatest level, as he asserts in the text file. So in the text file it says, "My last and greatest map." That's the one thing that it says from Lainos. There's no story per se. I mean, I guess beyond what you can gather. Presumably it fits into the Sacrament story at the end if you want to, make that conclusion, although that's not indicated in the text file or whatever. This was obviously not his last map, as he made several more maps, including Comatose, which is the one that people tend to regard as his best map, and I'll probably play it at some point. But that one came out in 2016. I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but the one-man Doom blog is a good just overview with screenshots and, just a general good overview of a bunch of different Doom mods. And there's stuff that is hard to find on YouTube. I mean, the Doom community is pretty active, and usually there are YouTube playthroughs of, some random Doom mod, but it's kind of a crapshoot sometimes, and he'll review stuff and actually provide screenshots, so that's always nice and appreciated. So, this teleporter sends me back, and I'm just trying to go on the roof here and, move over and get to where I need to get to. I don't need to get to there. Just kind of navigating the environment, figuring out where you can walk and not walk is a big feature of a lot of these maps, because they'll have kind of an indistinguishable kind of sandwich of earth textures or whatever, And it's not always clear, what is what is considered stairs by the Doom engine and what is too high. So kind of just like running around and figuring out where you can actually go up is kind of part of this, and some people might find that frustrating, but because this isn't really combat heavy, it doesn't really bother me, because that's just kind of trying to figure out the rules of the environment is a big part of these maps to begin with. So I feel like it works. And I'm having trouble moving over here. I think I'm overthinking this, because I think you can just run straight without having to do the diagonal strafing that I'm doing. Yeah, this is the kind of, reminds me a little bit of the industrial zone in Doom 2, which has something similar to this. This does something that I know BeeWen's maps do a lot, and also just other Russian Doom maps, I see it more, because they're really trying to like make the environment into like more of a substantial thing that feels like it has life and like an identity, and isn't just like abstract Doom geometry or like a fun level to navigate around. And I think as a result of that, there's some of this silly navigation, but it also lends to this feeling that like, you have to go through some obscure pathway in order to get to where you need to. And I think here's a great example, because these like stake things here, it was actually very convenient that I got shot by that chain gunner, because of that I noticed that, I could probably try and walk over these, and indeed I was able to. But that is not something you necessarily intuit unless you realize you're out of options. But the more that you realize that the environment is kind of constructed around navigating something, the more that you realize like, okay, maybe I need to do this. And here's a good example. So now I feel like a little trapped, but I can get out of here and just basically go back to where I was, which doesn't get me anything if I walk over that fence. So what I need to do is walk on top of the fence all the way around, which you'll see in a second. So like I've played enough of these WODs to where I like understand that that's what you're supposed to do, and that that's what is expected of you, that like kind of following some obscure pathway is kind of part of the whole experience. And you can see the way that the boxes are stacked, and you can walk on this little corner thing. It's like constructed for you, but you wouldn't necessarily know it. And there's our shiny red key. But yeah, so now I can climb here. I love these filing cabinets being like this is a part of a room or something that used to exist, and now you can climb over these filing cabinets instead of being like environmental details. They're gameplay objects now. In the same way that like the random geometry of the sort of pit of a cave that you're in, like might prevent you from climbing out of it. But yeah, so now we're gonna go back. I think maybe a few more monsters spawned in, or I just hadn't killed them yet. I think I could just dive down there, but of course I didn't. I think I ended up taking the lift back, which is actually kind of silly. I don't think I needed to do that at all. But anyway, yeah, so now we're getting into that red brick. It's like there are just so many little details. I imagine like this was not stated when I talked to Lainos, when I interviewed him, but a lot of the environmental details just strike me, like abandoned buildings, things that are kind of like boarded up or crumbling or something. It just feels like this is kind of the post-Soviet landscape, where times are not necessarily great economically in Russia, and I think that maybe informs some of the architecture and the ways of the philosophy behind how you navigate the environment. I mean, I've said this before. I mentioned this game called was it called Vangers, a pretty famous Russian art game from the late 90s, but a very strange game. But many people, there's an article somewhere that you can find if you Google, where it just kind of talks about it having an important place in Russia of like, you know, the 90s post the collapse of the Soviet Union, and how it kind of like that sort of complete feeling of alienation and like just living in a completely different world, constructed on top of the forgotten ruins of the old one, was very much something that resonated. And I feel that a little bit with these maps. I mean, I don't know if that's an explicit really intention or it's just something that is just kind of there, but it's there intuitively, you know. Okay, here now we're in the giant base area. I don't know what else to call it. And the combat definitely gets a little bit more heavy, and I'm going to die more. But, you know, that's how it is. So I want to read a little bit through this interview that I have with Lainos here. Some of it is in the article. I'll kind of omit the bits where he's talking about A.L.T. specifically, and just like some of it is in the article where I wrote about A.L.T, you know, but some of it is not. Yeah, it's worth talking about since I'm looking at this map. Okay. Let us start here. Okay, yeah, here's one thing okay. Here's a question that I asked. What are some of the differences you perceive between the design style of the Russian Doom community and the community on Doom World and elsewhere? He says, I think that the Russian Doom community's approach is different in many respects because for a long time it had been developing autonomously, in compartment with the fact that Doom is not so popular in Russia, at least because at the moment of its actuality, PCs, as well as the more powerful consoles, were not so common in the country. Later, computers and the game itself became more common, but then not many people had the internet. And whoever had access to it often did not know other languages, maybe because they didn't even think about external communities. Therefore, they learned by trial and error, because there were no quality standards as well as generally accepted vectors. So they were not necessarily... So the point here is they're not necessarily aware of the existence of things like Doom World, or the standards or ideas of design of the, you know, English-speaking or, you know, other language-speaking Doom communities. Therefore, they... Yeah, okay. People tried to find a sort of originality, to do something unusual to surprise others. This was a forgiving factor for some roughness in their work, even if that was done subconsciously. Later, people began to approach this a little more consciously. Contacts with the world community ceased to be something individual, and then arose another question. What can we offer to it? How do we differ? Even if you do not think consciously about these categories, subconsciously questions like this will always arise. Because when you do a Doom wand, first of all, you're asking yourself questions like, what am I doing? Or to whom and why this can be interesting. A big existential question about modding in general, or doing something, you know, that has no commercial prospects. Definitely a big question that, you know, should be discussed more. By the way, I love this area. You can see all the... Oh, I love these giant glowing tech pillar things on my left here. But yeah, what was I going to say about that? So I'd imagine what he's mentioning when the Russian Doom community started to be conscious of itself as a thing that existed outside of other facets of the Doom community, and certain Russian Doom modders, like, for example, Eternal, started getting more attention in the mainstream Doom community, then that might have been the time where this generation of modders with Lainos and BeeWen and, you know, Azimale and Memphis, who's another one, and who else? Archie and, you know, some other people from that group probably came about. And so I think that through that there is actually a conscious effort to like, we're gonna make something that tells a story, and we're gonna like have a commitment to actually like following through on that story. Because like I don't know if I mentioned this in the article that I had on A.L.T, but when I looked at the forums, the iddqd.ru Russian Doom forums, and used Google Translate, I could tell that there was a lot of, they were very specific about like, you know, this needs to express something within the story of this WAD, and you need to follow things a certain way, and like, you know, how can we make this better? And there's a lot of like discourse about that. And I read that somewhat with the thread on like Sacrament and also A.L.T, but also other stuff as well. And of course there's, you know, plenty of Russian sets that are like speed maps or other things that don't necessarily have that. But for those sets, they were really concerned with that. And it's not really something that I had seen very much in just the general like Doom World community. Like most community projects in Doom World, there isn't tons of oversight about like what your map is specifically, other than maybe like, you know, balancing combat or something. But this is not what they were talking about. They were talking about like, how does this fit into the story? Like, does this, you know, say something? And that's what I found really interesting, because maybe that's kind of what I felt like I was missing from, you know, a lot of aspects of the Doom community, but just other modding scenes in general that are just kind of like, you know, have this nice attitude of just like, well, hey, get involved, you know, do what you can. And that's great. But like, you know, it's nice to see people like really trying to do something a little more higher concept. But yeah, anyway, to come back to this. So this is Lainos talking again. And of course, the mentality question is present here as well. I think people here are not naturally interested in doing something that will not cause any surprise and that won't break a couple of established rules of map designing. Of course, this can be said about any community, but all things are known by comparison. Now, the situation is changing. I talked to him in 2017. I imagine this still applies. The Russian Doom community is increasingly pouring into the world community and adopts that experience, while at the same time, of course, bringing something new to the world community. Many things aren't working anymore. Both players and mappers have realized different rules of good taste and other important moments, because it seems to me that the spontaneity is gradually leaving. People have more or less clear standards on how to do this or how to do that, and for the majority, perhaps, it is easier to learn to follow instructions than to puzzle over, inventing their own solutions to design problems, inventing new means of expression, and developing a sense of proportion. I think what he means there is like a sense of identity versus the rest of the world. All this does not mean that one should ignore someone else's experience, but it is important that the project's identity does not dissolve in the desire to conform. So a real strong interest in non-conformity and being surprising and different, which you can obviously, I mean, I could obviously see from these sets, but it's nice to have someone say it. Additionally, it's important to understand that the approach itself is different in the perception of mapping and games in general. It seems to me that in the West, video games are perceived more as an attraction, while on the other hand, we often see them more as an art, even if it might not be a high art. I mean, I don't even know what is a high art and low art anyway, but that's why people come to mapping. Many of my acquaintances who are designers are mapping for the sake of creativity, not to prove themselves. Therefore, they take this very seriously. So it's a personal expression. I mean, I would say that that's certainly the case with Doom World too, as well, or, you know, the Z-Doom or any other parts of the Doom community. But there is more of a, you know, I want to get a Cac award, I want to get recognized, you know, I want to be respected within this community thing that motivates, you know, maybe a lot more people in Doom World, which I'm not saying that, like, that is not a motivation that I am immune to. You know, I'm involved with, like, you know, indie games, independent game development, and just recently, a few days ago, the IGF Awards, the Independent Game Festival Awards, were announced. Might have actually been last night. I don't remember. And they announced the awards, and I've been part of the jury for that a few times for one of the categories. I love these giant shimmering tech wall garbles. I'm at 1% health, by the way. as the famous line goes, 1% save the game. Unfortunately, I did not follow that, so I'm gonna die at some point. But anyway, I mean, part of the motivation for me being involved with that stuff, the independent game development community, even if I'm trying to do my own weird thing, it's like trying to find recognition, because through recognition, maybe I can get a job or get more established, and I can do what I want to do, as a career. And that motivates a lot of it. That's something that it has motivated me, and I've become more okay with that. But also, I mean, okay. That area with the imps right there where they were throwing fireballs, that's where I need to go, and I will not realize that for another at least half an hour of the playthrough. I'm not sure if it's open up right now, but I could have just very easily gone there. But you don't know that when there's a billion other monsters to fight and places to go, so yeah. That's very funny to me, though. But yeah, I think so. I think there is a distinguishing difference. I mean, I'm sure cultural differences play into things too, because acceptance within the Doom world community, I'm sure, is nice, and Lainos certainly got it. But and Eternal as well. But it's a different thing to make something that is very much of your own. Okay, so here's another question I asked. One of the things that strikes me about A.L.T and some of the other WODs in the Russian Doom community, this one included, I would have to say, is how conceptual a lot of the projects are, and how much they seem to be trying to express a story. And again, I noticed this partially through looking at those threads and attempting to Google Translate. Why do you personally choose to work with Doom mapping and not choose to make an independent game or something that might be a fuller outlet for making a more story-driven experience? This is a question that I had been thinking about a lot, because I think a lot of these things, I think a game like A.L.T honestly might fit into the indie game scene in terms of conceptual nature more so than it really fits into a modding community. And I think that's true of, some of these Russian Doom mods as well. But anyway, here's his answer. He says, I often think about creating my own game, or at least changing Doom level designing to a more modern level making. But there are 3 reasons why I have not done so yet. First of all, I have not said everything that I want to say in Doom mapping yet. That remains to be seen, by the way, because he hasn't made anything since 2016, and I talked to him in 2017, but who knows. Anyway, this is Lainos again. I would not be able to work on something else in full force as long as I conceive the old project's ideas and plans. I want to literally squeeze out the maximum of this lesson that I can until I'll do it. I think he means, as much out of Doom, and learn as much out of Doom as he can until he's run out of ideas. There won't be any fully work on any new projects, if only because I will involuntarily return to the old ideas that have not been realized yet, and thus I'll start to walk around in circles. Secondly, in Doom level designing, I can focus on what I'm interested in and not be distracted by related areas of work. Because of the Doom engine's technical primitiveness, even the necessary non-core work requires less resources. That's a big one. For example, recently for one project, I needed a specific statue, and I made its sprite in about an hour. If I were making a map for a modern game, I would have to spend much more time to create a 3D model. Of course, I don't know how aware he is of indie games. That stuff might be coming into the consciousness more. That's something I'll talk about in a bit, but yeah, the general principle relies, even if you're making a sprite-based indie game, it's still more work. And if you make a map in some unusual setting, then a couple of models won't be enough. You need to create a huge amount of content that has little to do with the mapping itself. And doing so, doing it, the content, as I said, is absolutely different than making sprites for Doom. Also, for example, what if you do not know how to draw well or properly? Most likely for such a project you will need help from the outside, somebody else's help. And it's quite difficult to find such an enthusiast for your project, but even if you do find that person, then in fact your project will depend on him or her, and I do not like that. Of course, if I cannot draw something myself, I often ask the other Doomers to help me, but again, it's one thing to do a sprite for someone, and quite another to do a full 3D model. Doom allows me to fully concentrate on what I'm actually doing. Thirdly, however strange it may sound, I am attracted by limitations. On the one hand, there are always interesting to bypass. It is always interesting. There are always interesting things to discover. I'm not sure exactly what he's saying there. They are always interesting to bypass. It is always interesting in a logical task. Or it is always an interesting logical task. One such puzzle I was solving for about a month, and already I was thinking to deal with it that I must bury that particular idea, but in the end I finally solved it, and it was interesting. On the other hand, it has long been known that the limitations spur on the creative process. Some creative people even deliberately set limits to themselves, because in such situations there must be bright and weighty ideas. Otherwise, restrictions and conditionalities will literally suffocate them. Thus, weak and immature ideas disappear. I mean, this is a big thing when I talk about game design. By the way, where I am right now with this like opening double-sided kind of switch room, that's literally what I thought the critical path was. I thought that I needed to hit those switches, and I was like very sure that that's what I needed to do, but I don't think you need to do that. It just, the whole level was kind of leading me to think that. Anyway, what he says about weak and immature ideas disappearing is a big thing that comes up when I do game design classes. It's like, you got to start with a limited engine, a limited kind of setup, like start with something like modding or, you know, making a level for something or something like that, because it gets you to think about, you know, things that you can actually do without getting lost in the high concept. You know, I'm going to do an everything, you know, I'm going to make this wonderful, great thing that's going to transform the world, etc., you know. Yeah. Anyway, Lainos says, well, and besides, it's always pleasant to surprise players with some new thing or cunning trick. Yeah. But so many of these Russian Doom maps really aim to do that. They're trying to surprise you with something new. They're trying to, like, hit you with something that you just didn't really expect. Okay, here's another question that I asked. Do you think that there is a particular mood or feeling that you or other mappers in the Doom community, Russian Doom community, are trying to express with your maps? Do you have those in mind before you start mapping, or do you not think about that when you're mapping? Lainos says, I do not think that the whole community has a general idea or mood for common expression. In the end, everyone treats Doom level designing differently, and each has his own tastes. For me, my ideas first are maturing in my head, taking some form before I initially start to implement them. Of course, even my work initially contains something that I want to say. No, rather, to show, to give a feeling. I think the player does not have to understand everything that I put into my work, but I want them to perceive at some subconscious level intuitively, to feel it. As for me, it's more important to establish such a connection than to say anything explicitly or directly. Again, that's something I could extrapolate, but it's nice to hear it. That there isn't like a specific story, there isn't a specific idea, one specific idea that's trying to be expressed. It's more about an intuitive sort of feeling. Again, I love that feeling in art in general. You know, I'm a big fan of David Lynch and all that, and other, you know, film artists who are operate in that mode. Tarkovsky, and I watched the Ingmar Bergman movie. I rewatched the movie Persona recently. That's another. You know, it's just you can make a lot of analysis. You can go a lot of different places with it, and that's great. I love to analyze things, but in some way it's really trying to capture something more intuitive and be a little bit more multifaceted and open to interpretation. Okay. So here's another question I asked. I'm going back a little bit because this applies to this, because this map was supposed to be for Sacrament anyway. What were some of the artistic inspirations behind the design of A.L.T and Sacrament, as well as your own maps? Were they inspired by other Doom mappers out there, or is there a broader range of inspiration, i.e. non-Doom games, visual art, music, TV, and movies, etc.? He doesn't say this, but I definitely noticed a huge anime inspiration, like more especially in hindsight. There's a bunch of references in A.L.T to Evangelion, which is like Evangelion doesn't surprise me, but I didn't really know that because I was not an anime person and didn't watch Evangelion until, you know, after playing A.L.T and like writing that article about it. But there's a map called Seal and a map called Gahern, which are things that are like in the universe of Evangelion. And there's some music that they use. Like I think Controlled System also has anime music. So yeah, it's definitely an anime inspiration. But anyway, this is what Lainos says. Here I cannot speak for everyone, at least because the mapping in BOS, Clan BOS again, which made A.L.T and Sacrament, was always quite free enough, and I preferred to set relatively general tasks and specify a necessary vector for mapping. As for setting the restrictions and giving corrections, I did them already in the course of the mapping process. So mappers in most cases were not connected, even in the choice of topic or location for the maps, with the exception, of course, in moments when important concepts were discussed. So maybe I overstated that, you know, how much they were communicating with each other, but I still think I saw that more than I see in the usual Doom community, unless you're talking about like smaller, more controlled maps, like Doom the way it did or something. I'm sure they were much more insistent on things matching a specific style and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But for your average community set, that's not necessarily the case at all. So mappers in most cases were not connected, even the choice of, with the exception, of course, of moments when important concepts are discussed. Okay. Well, that inspires each particular person is usually a secret. What inspires each particular person is usually a secret. If we are to talk about my sources of inspiration, then I never had the one exact source of it. I always try to do something original in my heart. Of course, originality itself is always a dilemma. Let's just say that I'm taking the idea that I cannot even figure out. Oh, by the way, this is the area that I was mentioning before that it's kind of the critical endpoint. It loops me back around to where where I began the map in that like open field area. So yeah, that's kind of a cool. I always love it when you see an area at the end. This map, by the way, has a thing that I really like. It's in a Wolfenstein map I don't like, but I really like this idea of Wolfenstein Episode 6 Map 1 has this thing where you, right from the beginning, you can look and you see the exit right there, but it's blocked behind columns, you know. And it doesn't quite have a similar thing, but it is like you exit in a similar place where you started off, but you go on this crazy journey to get there. I always love that theme for maps. I mean, it can be overdone, but I still really love it when it's done really well, which I think this map is a good one of the prime examples of a map that does that. Which I just love. I think that's the best part about this map is how it sends you through this whole journey and then you end up kind of where you started off. But yeah, anyway. Lainos, I love that. See, I feel like that switch might have been important that I just shot. That like switch on that giant. I don't know for sure. I felt like that was important. Again, that might have just done nothing. That might have just opened up a secret or something. I'm going to have to look back at the map editor, and perhaps other people have played this and are more familiar. They know like exactly where, what each thing is doing, but I had no idea. Anyway, going back to Lainos. If I were to talk about my sources, try to do something original and hard. Of course, originality in self is always a dilemma. Let's just say that I'm taking an idea that I cannot even figure out from where it came from in my mind. At the same time, of course, I can take some images from outside, stringing them on frames or even mixing them. Sometimes you may wonder how incompatible or even different the essence of the images are woven into something really interesting, just like synesthesia. Answering these points together, I will say I rarely am taking something consciously from other works without any changes, and I almost don't play other WADs. Specifically speaking about A.L.T and Sacrament, the concept and the spirit of the first were quite clearly set by the original ideas of the author, who was Azamale. However, a very big influence was made by BeeWen, who was working with maps post-processing. That is, he completed some maps of other authors and improved almost all the WAD's maps. He mentions this, which is, I kind of already knew that because I had talked to BeeWen, but that's getting into A.L.T. Okay. At the same time, I do not think that the authors were inspired by something exact like me, because everyone tried to give freedom to their fantasies to do something original. This was expressed, for example, also with the fact that in many places, places were made specifically with the expectation of knocking the player out of the comfort zone and making them think a little bit. Make him feel that he is not in the familiar world he knows and understands. This idea was manifested even in small things, for example, the interpick in A.L.T, but you can say this applies to anything, which he was mentioning is consisting of two combined landscapes. The inner pick of A.L.T is like the Hellraiser maze and like a plane flying over it, but it's kind of melded in a way that looks very actually like those two things belong, which is really interesting. At the same time, we tried not to go too far with it and not to go all the way down into trash and schizophrenia. This required constant monitoring and corrections, sometimes even a change in the perception of their own ideas. By the way, some WAD maps were cut out for similar reasons. So yeah, he's talking about how they cut out similar maps for not meeting with the mood. It says, at the time I got carried away by... in the case of Sacrament, after DeWill came out, which was the first Clan BOS thing, which is like a decent WAD, but definitely not at the level of Sacrament and A.L.T. It says, at the time I got carried away by different gloomy and mystical animes. Well, there you go. And that's why I proposed the very concept. Later it gained an idea about the end of the world and the bloody moon at the end of the WAD. The image, which I learned was from the Wolf's Rain anime. So that's what the bloody moon is in this skybox, by the way. It's from the Wolf's Rain anime, apparently. After DeWill's light daytime levels, I personally wanted to give a player a bit more of a feeling of an estrangement and prostration, which resulted in the WAD's general atmosphere, which fits very well here. I mean, this is very much of a piece with Sacrament. And then he talks about Doxylamine Moon, which has that mood. He said it was inspired by Resident Evil. It's funny, initially I was not going to take it for it, but I was sure I wouldn't be able to make such an important, spectacular map well enough, while at the same time transferring the atmosphere of loneliness in the city. But when it became clear that the person responsible for this map could not finish the task, then I had no choice. And then he talks about how the last map was taken over by BeeWen, and that's how 5 till level 1 complex this level started. It was planned to be a location for Phoenix Colony, which is, I guess, part of the story of Sacrament, and it was supposed to be the last map. But having lost time on Doxylamine Moon, I did not have enough chance to finish the map on time, so I suggested to BeeWen to finish it. And as we know, he managed to make a great map, controlled system. And, Okay, so I think the other stuff just talks about, A.L.T. I read pretty much all of the interview that I did with Lainos. I hope you appreciated that. We still have like a half an hour left of this video. Yeah, and I'm still fighting monsters here. But yeah, I mean, there's so many little details in this that I just love. I think this is where I pick up the computer map, and the computer map is designed kind of like a classroom, with like a view of like I think it's like a heart, yeah. And the spiders, I imagine the spider masterminds, they're like the teachers or something. I love these sets that it's like, obviously this is like supposed to be some kind of real life setting, but it's, you know, made surreal. A.L.T has a lot of these. Actually, this map reminds me a little bit of map 3 in A.L.T, which is the city, like, town map, and it has a lot of, it's not as like moody as this map, but it has a lot of rooms kind of like this where it's like the facsimile of like a real life setting, you know, but made surreal and weird and doomy. And the lighting is very good, you know, just it's pretty simple, but I don't know, I just love that lighting. In Doxy Lamine Moon, there are kind of secrets, parts of the map that revolve around this kind of theme of mysticism, and but the heart here and the kind of other symbol there, I don't think mean anything in particular in this map. But this area having the computer map is important, and I'm really glad that it's part of the crucial path, because it helps me, you know where I can go and where I can't go, and that ends up being pretty important. So yeah, this is the kind of map where just letting the player grab the computer map and just figure out where they need to go is really important. So I'm really glad that he did that. I mean, I think this is in general a pretty thoughtfully designed map. I could go over like all the specific little details, you know, made in Doom geometry, but a lot of this stuff isn't apparent from looking at it. This is another, as you notice, like I crawled up kind of the when people do this with like Doom engine geometry, you know, where they have the little tiny steps that you can barely see that you can crawl up, and it doesn't look like, if you don't know the Doom engine, it doesn't look like you should be able to do that. That's always a really funny thing to me. I think it kind of goes with the feeling of like you're going somewhere you're not supposed to. Yeah, here I still haven't taken care of these guys. I just ran away from them initially. This is kind of like, I imagine these are like control centers or like guard towers or something. Again, this room feels pretty crucial. I think it's close to the entrance of where I entered in, and it had that that elevator that I thought was really, really important, but I don't think actually means anything. There are some, like, I don't know why I'm fighting this guy with a pistol. There are some like, you know, ammo. I think there's like a plasma rifle or something in that area, so that could just be the one primary reason for getting it. It's also really hard to see what weapons you have when you have partial invulnerability on. The thing I was going to say about like indie games and the indie game scene is, like, you know, ever since I started doing these videos, especially the last few years, when I started doing these videos, like, I felt like the whole idea of like level design and making something that is really based around level design was kind of out of favor for like indie games. And it was much more like high concept, a lot of roguelike stuff. That stuff is still, you know, popular, of course. But then the whole like retro FPS, like boomer shooter thing started becoming a thing, like really like 3 years ago with Dusk. And I think Dusk has some really great level design in it. So I really don't have much bad to say about Dusk, other than it's a little like a little bit, I'm not like fond of some of the like 90s references. I think it's a little bit silly and kind of stupid in some places, but I really like some of the levels, in especially the second and third episode. There's some really cool ones. There's the one where you're like upside down and have reverse gravity, and that's kind of, when I think of like weird Doom mods, you know, or weird things that I like, that's like number one. That's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. And there isn't as much of that in in Dusk as I would like, but at least it's there. But in a lot of these other like boomer shooters, that's just kind of gone, and they're a little bit more Doom 2016-y or like brutal Doom or just like, you know, something like that. And the kind of the dreaminess of and the higher like concept artistic ideas are just kind of taken away because it's become almost like a, I don't know, like a costume or something. It's become almost like it's starting to become more of like a, you know, like a marketing point. Like people are advertising themselves a certain way, and there is that kind of like brutal doomish, like rip and tear thing, which is like, it's fine, like, but it's not really my thing. Like, it's not really why I'm interested in it. I just grew up with Doom, and what I grew up with, the aspects of Doom that I liked were a lot different from a lot of other people's. But I just feel a little sad too, because I feel like it's introducing. It is one thing that has the potential to commercialize the space in a way that nothing really else has. I mean, Doom wads are never going to go for sale, obviously, but there have been a few commercially released GZ Doom projects through the whole boomer shooter thing, and also in one or two in Build Engine and one or two in the Quake engine, that, you know, that have come out that have done okay, as far as I can tell. And I'm certainly not saying that's a bad thing, but like, I just worry about the expectations being kind of higher, and like some of the weirdness of this being lost. I mean, I would love to see, like, you know, a boomer shooter. I hate the term boomer shooter. I feel like boomer shooter is kind of a marketing category too. I don't feel like it actually describes anything. So we'll say retro FPS. I mean, I like the idea of a retro FPS being weird and different, but the thing that I would say about this isn't like, these Russian Doom maps are not really retro. I mean, they're using Doom, which is retro, but like the design sensibility is not retro, you know? Whereas like even in the weirder moments of Dusk or maybe a Medieval, I like a Medieval a lot actually, but even in the weirder moments, there is more of an ostensibly like retro sensibility. It's inspired much more directly by that stuff. This doesn't really have an inspiration necessarily even in the game space, but if it does, it's like things that are a little more esoteric and weirder. And it's not like, the thing with a huge modding community is that the more people participate, the more people will do things that you would never expect someone to do. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in someone doing something that you expected. And like part of like the marketing of a lot of indie games is in doing something that you expect, or at least it's in doing something that like is weird in one way but is what you expect in every other way. I mean, I think that's the kind of crucial component of like the commercially successful indie scene, is it's like weird in one way but kind of the same, kind of what you would expect in every other way. And of course there are many things that don't fit that, but if you're looking at a lot of the most like identifiable commercially successful things, then that's definitely the case. And I mean, I would say the same thing about the retro FPS, even if it's marketing towards a different group of people. Then like, you know, like a different group of people is going to play Antechamber, or I don't know, I keep bringing up Antechamber. A different group of people is going to play Gone Home or like Night in the Woods or whatever, then is going to play Dusk, or, you know, the Hedden or whatever that game's called, or, you know, like there's a bunch of them. Project Warlock is one of them. I actually kind of want to play that game, but I don't know, you know, one of the many retro FPS games of the recent times. So I guess I feel mixed feelings about all of that stuff. I mean, I believe that the Doom modding community will exist and continue to exist regardless. But it is something that is a component that I didn't even necessarily consider happening even, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of a whole thing. Again, this is another area that I think is a critical path. Oh yeah, more like client walls that you can ascend really fastly because the geometry is laid out such that you can climb it like a staircase. There's like several parts of A.L.T that are like this. I mean, this came out the same year as A.L.T, so I mean it's easy for me to compare it to A.L.T. I think A.L.T has like, this reminds me of an area I think in map 6 of A.L.T, which again is one of the like city maps. This is like, I so thought that this was a critical path of like, this is the area I was talking about before with the like the platform and with the 2 switches, and like that central switch looks important. All it does is put down the platform. I'm not even sure what this like platform does beyond like just connect up 2 areas, I guess, that both of which I've already been to. There's this secret with the plasma, which is cool, so I guess I'm glad I got that. I found that, but it's not a secret, but you know what I mean. There's one secret that I missed. One secret that I went to earlier where there was like I walked through the wall and there was like a lost soul there and I picked up some stuff, but there's another secret with a BFG somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it's fine. But those are the only 2 secrets in the map. So it's not really a secret heavy map because the exploration is kind of, I mean, you find secrets insofar as like you explore areas that you don't necessarily need to go to but might contain interesting things. But yeah, I was so sure that this is where you needed to go because it seemed like I was like, I don't know. It is what it is. Yeah, that just moves it back down. And I'm not even sure what like having that go up does. I'm not even sure what that switch does. Perhaps it does something already that it's already active. Other than like, having that platform active so I can cross, which again, I've said I've been to both of those areas. But yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of anxiety about, I always feel good when I go back to play these Russian maps, and I always like feel like, especially with not as much this, but with like A.L.T or Voyager, which has never been properly released, but especially A.L.T. I feel like I'm kind of a chorus of one a little bit. I mean, I know there's definitely fans, but it's not something that is like consensus popular, and I always kind of felt like I was projecting onto things, and like, I mean, doing that interview with Lainos especially kind of confirmed that I wasn't. But whenever I go back and play these things, it's like, oh yeah, it is as good and as cool as I imagined, and that goes for this too. And that goes for some other Russian Doom releases that I haven't even talked about yet, like Bloody Steel and that other map from Voyager, which I eventually going to talk about. And it's just a kind of a cozy feeling for me. I enjoy it so much more. I was actually going to play some other older Doom levels, and I decided just to do this because it was just like, it's kind of like it's like a warm blanket for me or something. It's my shit. But yeah, unfortunately, is just, I mean, I guess I would say that they're, from what I've seen, the Doom community is obviously big and diverse, but from what I see on like Doom World, there's a variety of stuff, but it is generally more focused on tighter combat-oriented things. And, insofar as they're loose, wandery things, they don't really have the fully formed sensibility of something like this. Okay, I think this is where I love this giant structure here. There is a... I think there is a a soul sphere here that I want to pick up. These areas damage you, which I find very interesting. I mean, this is something done in the original Doom, though. Okay, never mind. There's another area that has a soul sphere in it. Another one of those. Perhaps I've already picked it up. Well, whatever. I'm pretty close to the time where I cut because I spent another half an hour wandering around not knowing where I needed to go. As you can see, I've like... places that I haven't been would be grayed out, and there are not very many of them. So I'm not really sure where to go now. Where I do need to go is on the right-hand side of the map, which I thought that those might just be background structures because they're, they're not grayed out. Okay, yeah, here's where I made the cut. So yeah, you just missed about, I don't know, maybe like 30 minutes of me wandering around not knowing where I needed to go and wandering back and maybe picking up more ammo, but essentially no progress was made. This is the area that I mentioned before. There were a bunch of imps here earlier. This is where I needed to go, and it was just so easy to miss because it didn't seem like anything big or secret. It just seemed like a rooftop, but no, you can actually climb on the side here just like you could in the earlier like ruined city section, and that's how I climb over this wall and get into that area. And I'm slowly realized that I love the like those are in Alt too, but like the weird like super low resolution like bookshelves or shelves full of food and stuff that just looks so fucking grainy and grody, but like because they have some kind of purpose in the map, they work. So yeah, this is the really like getting into the last section of the map. This is kind of its own discrete section here where I'm kind of making the long trek back from that giant base, which is probably the closest thing in this map to a more conventional Doom mod, other than the fact that it is so non-linear. To the outskirts of this, ruined city, and I'll pick up the last 2 keys here, and it'll basically just loop me back around to where I began, and then I'll exit out there. So I really love this last section, and I would love to go back and like just see how early I can get here, because I have a feeling that you can get here a lot earlier than I was thinking. No, you can't go in any of these buildings. These are really just scenery. This is kind of throwing you back on a more linear path at this point, which is an interesting structure when you think about it. I mean, like, there's like discrete phases to the map where it's like it's linear. It's like slightly open but linear, and then like, you have like a maze, and then like you have like kind of a mini sandbox but basically linear section with that ruined city. And then once you get into the the big base area or whatever you want to call it, it is very non-linear. And then once you get back here, it's pretty linear again. The yellow key is just sitting in these random like ruined buildings with the shotgun sergeants just kind of randomly chilling there. And the one thing I will say about this map is, if you look at the beginning of the map, if you look across a pit that you can't get past, you will see the blue key. So you at least know that the existence of another key other than the red key. And right at the beginning of the map, when I went through the hedge maze, there was a switch for a yellow key door, and you could hit it, but nothing happens. And some maps are weird where we'll have a switch that'll be textured with the yellow key, but you can actually hit it when you have no keys. So I didn't think much of that, but that's actually where you exit the map. So that yellow key was very important that I picked up. So it all came back around. With these things, like, you never know what isn't fully intended and what's not, and what maybe certain maps were like intended to be longer and more. I totally ate it with the rocket there, which I felt very embarrassed about, because it's not like the combat is like super hard here or anything. I think I end up having to do this whole section over again because I didn't save, which was very dumb. But oh well. Yeah, I mean, there are certain, or like the key will be in a secret or something, or like, you know, there'll be some secret thing that is like not required, so you just like kind of run by it, or it just doesn't go anywhere, like, or you know, you think something is referencing something else, but it's a red herring. But my favorite maps are the ones that, you know, make it seem like it's going to be a secret, and then you come back around and it's actually an important part of the map. I kind of like, maybe this is weird. This is just me specifically, but I kind of don't like burying things in secrets in general. I kind of like, if you're gonna do something that is a cool idea, I kind of like the idea of working that back into the main thing, and then just like maybe having secrets be little fun, just tiny side things instead of something big and ambitious. But I don't know, there's different philosophies with that. That's just something I came upon with the game that I made, Problematic, which is, I guess, close to, I made that in 2013, but I had a similar thing where I was like, oh, well, I have this whole set of secret exits to two levels on the last phase of the game. I'm going to make that optional. And then I realized, like, you just kind of missed, like, a whole part of the experience of the game if you didn't play through them. And like, yeah, I could assume that somebody might come back and see that if they were committed enough, but I just decided to like weave that back into the whole game and make that a part of the experience, so that like everyone who plays through the game has that experience. Some people might, you know, not like that. Some people might, you know, want to be like, well, you should make it easier to beat a game and then you should open it up if people want to play it further. I don't know. I personally think that like, if you have something that you're trying to express, or like a full experience, then you're kind of like, you're kind of cheating yourself if you're not like capturing it to the, you know, capturing the best part of the experience to everyone who plays through it. That's just how I feel personally. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've talked about so much. What else is there to talk about? I don't know. Let's look at the one-man Doom. Yeah. If any one thing is going to throw players off, this is from One Man Doom blog, by the way. It says, if any one thing is going to throw players off, it's Lainos' favorite puzzle feature, climbing segments, which will be intuitive for explorers like myself, but challenging for others. I mentioned that before, just the random like scaling of walls and stuff. That's something that is done in Alt a lot. Yeah, it's just a thing that I really like. But if I, you know, had people playtest this on Doom World, you know, if I made a map, I mean, I probably wouldn't make a map like this, but let's say I made a map that featured that kind of thing heavily. I'm sure I get a lot of people complaining about it on Doom World, but, you know, there's some features like at the beginning of the map, you know, where there was that door that was kind of hidden away in obscurity, that you kind of, it was behind a tree. By the way, this is the city from the beginning. We can see from the other side of the pit where that, you know, nice shiny blue key was. This is right at the beginning of the map on the other side of the pit that you cannot cross, which I love. I just love that so much. I love maps that do that. And I love how this like, the switch causes a bunch of buildings to go up. I mean, I know it's not any more complicated than they just made platforms go up, but just the idea of hitting a switch and just like making buildings appear out of nowhere. I was honestly kind of in awe. I was like shocked when that happened. I was like, it's amazing that you can still be kind of like awed by something, you know, made in an engine like this. But that's why I love this kind of experience. Yeah, here I picked up the last key. Now I'm just gonna, that area that I had to skip by with the blue key, I can go through there now, and I go some winding stairways and back to where we began. Back to to complete the journey. It's almost like a full lifetime is being captured in one map here. Yeah. You know, the funny thing is I was always more of a megawad person because I like the idea that you can just skip to random parts and like kind of sample things, and you never know what is going to hit at any particular point. But over time, I become much more like okay and like small map sets that are just like one big map, or you know, a set of 5 to 10 maps. I'm not as wedded to that like megawad format as I used to be. I think because like the Doom community just inherently has valued megawads as being like this great canonical object. It's like a novel versus a short story or something, you know. But you know, there are a lot of shitty novels and there are a lot of good short stories. And for the purposes of Doom Mixtape, obviously a single map set is great because it gets across just literally everything about it in one map. So yeah, here we're back at the city from the beginning. So cool to see. We love it. And a few more monsters have spawned in. And I guess the way that, because you could really easily miss if I did not go to the part of the hedge maze with the yellow key. Yeah, that's where I began with the nice dreamy. I haven't used the word dreamy a lot, but that's the number one way I would describe like Lainos' maps and just the feeling of this map in general. Impressionistic and dreamy. Free associative. Yeah, this hedge maze spawned in a ton of revenants, and I have just enough ammo really to take care of them. So I got just enough. So this map really gives you just enough ammo to deal with everything. But I think the point of spawning in those revenants, other than, you know, just like showing that something new has happened, indicating is also they're also coming from one side, so you're gonna want to go to that side naturally, and you could have very easily skipped over this part of the map and not seen that there was this yellow key part here. I didn't, but you might not know it's there, and then you'd be like, where the fuck am I going? So yeah, now we're ascending into these pixelated clouds. I guess you're going into heaven. So you may or may not have died, or maybe you're waking up from a dream. There's so many of these the best Russian Doom maps that have that feeling, and it's wonderful to me because there is an essential essential dreamlikeness to this. This map is saying that this thing is saying that I suck, but in fairness, this is a very long map, so I don't feel too bad about how long I took. But yeah, that was 5 till level 1 complex. I hope you enjoyed this long ass video. I'm glad that I finally played through it, and I'm glad that I had an excuse to talk about it and read through basically the entire interview that I did with Lainos. But as you all know, no matter what happens, you'll always end up back in the underhalls. So anyway, have a good night, and stay tuned for more Doom mixtapes in the future.